Welcome everyone to the ninth keynote of AO Ventures. This is our second last week of keynotes before we start prepping for demo day. I'm here with Tate. He's got his camera off just because he's in Berlin for Arweave Day, and we have his camera off so his audio comes through a little bit better. And he's here to talk to us about lessons that he learned from being a crypto founder. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section, and we'll stay on after the presentation to answer a few of them live. With that being said, I'm excited to pass the mic to Tate, and we can get started.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Yes, apologies that the no camera here for now. Unfortunately, the hotel Wi-Fi is not quite conducive when I'm sharing my screen as well. But I hope voice will suffice. I'm going to be giving this talk today, inspired by a talk that I'm actually going to be giving tomorrow that is quite similar to this in Arweave Day. I think there have been a lot of things that have happened over the last year that I've kind of gone through as a founder. And I think it's probably safe to say that this past year was one of the hardest years of my life in general. And I want to talk about it, not because I think I get excited about talking about problems that I've gone through in the past, but hopefully some of the learnings that I have kind of gone through in that process are things that, are helpful to you all as you're looking at starting things or growing the things that you've already started. Um, and it's also worth mentioning that a lot of this stuff is not something that I typically talk about in public or ever thought I would talk about in public, but decided to talk about simply because I think that it's information that I wish I could have heard a year or two ago when I was getting off the ground myself. So yeah, with that said, 2023 was quite a difficult year. Obviously, there are no tailwinds around crypto. Projects were shutting down left and right because of those lack of tailwinds. And there wasn't really a viable path to retail adoption because the sentiment was just so nasty. I would say 2023 was kind of the year of like peak bear market vibes, or rather maybe trough bear market vibes. People were very unhappy. But also at the beginning of that year, I ended up splitting with my co-founder. I've had several co-founders in the past. Some I still work with, but this one was one that I had partnered with because my skill set was in engineering, and his skill set was very non-technical, focused on legal and operations. And I learned a lot from him. We had a great relationship at the time, but unfortunately, I think the bear market kind of got the best of the company, and uh, he and I had two different ideas of directions that we wanted to take the company. And so ultimately, it led us to the decision to kind of split. Now, I think I made a lot of mistakes in that process of the way that I structured my arrangement with him from an equity standpoint. One big learning is, and this may sound obvious, but with co-founders, no matter how close you are, I think it's really important to always have vesting on equity if you're working with with someone that's intended to be there for a long time. Always good to have that contractually represented, even though verbally you're probably both representing it to each other. At the end of the day, though, tough times test people. I think it tested all of the people that I was around, because I was in not the best place when this was happening because I didn't quite expect it. Um, and it also tested a lot of the people that whose opinions mattered a lot to me, and still matter a lot to me. And so there are a few things that I learned from the experience of kind of splitting with him, going separate ways, and then kind of fixing some problems that had been created as a result of our parting ways. The number one lesson is that communication is critical. It might sound obvious, but I think that I've heard in the past there's kind of like five different types of audiences that you need to be speaking to as a founder, or as you're building a company: team, advisors, investors, users, and then the general public. And if you don't have communication for all five of those buckets locked down, you have potential for miscommunications on the horizon, or potential for problems as a result of those miscommunications. Um, One thing that I was incredibly nervous about was to speak with my investors and tell them that, my co-founder and I were splitting ways. Um, but it ended up going as well as it could have possibly gone, because the people that I was around were very supportive, and they appreciated that I was communicating it. I've seen teams elsewhere that have split ways, and it had been months before they had communicated that to their investors. And their other stakeholders were very upset about the matter because they wanted to be in the know of what was actually going on. And so fortunately, like, didn't do that. It was still a tough time, but people are more supportive than you might think. The other thing that I learned was, you have to become independent from praise. And it's funny because, like, the YC pitch is all about like building something other people love. But at the end of the day, the motivation for building things needs to come from within. It can't come from without. The other reason that this is strange is because I think that we're all raised, as children at least, to be so dependent on other people's expectations or other people's opinions to guide us along the way. Even if it's not our parents or our friends, like generally as you're a kid, there's like something in your life that's motivating you. That is this oftentimes a person or the opinion of somebody or multiple people. But when you become a founder, you can't always rely on that. I think it's really important to ensure that the drive for building the thing that you're trying to build comes from within. And the reason for this is because there were some people that I became very close to before all of this happened, that didn't react the way that I had expected them to act when I did tell them that I was splitting with my co-founder. Um, and their opinions on the matter really hurt me. It damaged my self-confidence because it made me question if I was making the right decision, and it also made me question if I was in the right place to begin with, doing the work that I'm doing. And so fortunately those relationships have since been mended, but a big part of, you know I guess, coming to terms with that was the fact that you can't become dependent on others for praise. It really does have to come from within. The third unintended side effect of my co-founder and I splitting was that our culture had become the strongest it had ever been through that experience. Um, as I said earlier, like, tough times test people, and I think that the people that come through with those tests, I think, it can really help to build a team or solidify a team to go through a hard time like that. And I'm very thankful for the support that I had along the way from our team when I was going through that time, because I feel that much closer to them, and we were able to bond over something that was difficult. So that was story number one. That was beginning of the year. Shortly after that, you guys might remember the bank runs on Signature Bank, Silvergate, SVB, and a few others. Um, we were affected by this, unfortunately. We so the I guess the story behind this is, um, I had when this started happening, I was traveling, and there was one morning that I woke up, um, and I had just arrived in Berlin, like overnight had flown. So I was deboarding the plane after I'd woken up, and I got a bunch of text messages from people that were panicking. And the reason is because First Republic had a bank run that started, if you all remember, which is where over 95% of our cash was from all of the fundraisers that we had done in the past. So, raising 30 million, most of that cash was in First Republic. And it was in a bank account because we had, assumed First Republic is a very notable bank, very good reputation, had, incredible recommendations from our investors and other advisors. Um, and so we put our cash in the bank, and we were, turning yield on that. But I was in Berlin. I was getting a FaceTime from a friend that told me, you need to go into the local branch in First Republic in New York because he had assumed I was in New York and try and make a manual withdrawal because the website's down. The website crashed. It's not working. You can't process wires right now. Um, Again, I had just landed in Berlin, so there was nothing I could do from that, which was a very scary time because all of the work that we had put in was, we were afraid that we were going to lose our cash at least for a period of time and not be able to make payroll. Uh, and so after that, I got on the phone and started just calling banks, probably, over 10 and within 24 hours managed to get into the setup process with 5 to 6 banks to see if we could get accounts set up for when we figured out how to move the money, we'd have a place for it to go. That was a really just wild experience because I had never really spent a ton of time working with bankers in the past and understanding how to speak with, people that were very heavy on finance and deep with those things. And I learned that the hard way because we were sitting on all of our cash and the bank had a bank run, couldn't withdraw the cash. And I was learning, on the fly, trying to make new accounts with these banks. All in all, like it worked out. First Republic was acquired by JP Morgan Chase, but even before that happened, we were able to withdraw our cash to these other accounts. And I learned a lot through the process too. One such thing being cash, money markets, and T bills in a single bank account is simply not enough. It's really strange because you would think that, like in crypto, the world that we live in, everything is so risky because things are. But at the end of the day, they do guarantee that we still have access of our over our funds because we're in charge of custodying them. Banks not so much. So if you do keep cash in your bank account or company bank account, look for what are known as spread accounts. Spread accounts are essentially a bank takes your money and it distributes it across multiple bank accounts, at least in the US. This is the case for the US. And the reason that it does that is because for each bank account that you have, that is, a notable bank, it'll come with an FDIC policy, insurance policy that guarantees in the event that that bank goes under, you have at least $250,000 to claim if that does happen. So if you're storing more than $250,000 in that bank account, you're covered up to that amount, but not more. And so spread accounts are a way to work with one bank to spread your cash across multiple bank accounts so that you can get that 250K coverage across all of those accounts and effectively break it up so that it fits into those chunks that are covered by the FDIC in the event that something like this were to happen and the government had to step in. So that was something that I learned that was helpful. Uh, Either way, getting multiple bank accounts is something that is extremely underrated, I think, especially in these times. And also, the really ironic thing is USDC. Like, if you all have looked at how USDC actually works, they spread their funds across bank accounts. And so, if you're purchasing USDC, you're inherently diversifying your cash because the cash that you're putting in is backed, or rather, the USDC that you're buying is backed by cash in more than one place. And so, in the event that one of those banks were to fail, yes, USDC would be at risk of depegging to an extent, but you wouldn't lose all of your cash because it would still have a significant chunk of it in other banks. And then finally, building relationships with bankers, I think, is incredibly underrated too. Something that I didn't know much about, but have come to appreciate. Also, because when you have those types of things, you can learn more about other instruments that you could be putting the cash in as low risk of a way to be able to earn yield, given these conditions, and not have to worry too much about the business, while also staying safe. Second thing is that it's not bad to ask for advice on how to deploy capital, which might sound funny, but if you think about it, at least when I was thinking about it, um, the first time I went to market to fundraise 4 years ago, I was afraid to ask investors how they thought I should spend the money because it sounds like such an obvious question or a dumb question. But truly, I think that investors are very helpful, especially with these types of questions, because more often than not, they're dealing with large amounts of cash themselves that they have to figure out how to manage responsibly when they're not deploying it into other investments. Um, and so being comfortable and building relationships with your own investors to ask for advice on things like that, it helped so much. When we sent out a investor update, um, notifying them that the First Republic situation had happened, within 20 minutes, all of a sudden, left and right, our investors were coming to us saying, we have a connection to Merrill Lynch. We know JP Morgan. We know Goldman Sachs. Do you want an intro? And that's really what made it possible to get in touch with these banks so quickly. And so can't recommend that enough. Like when these bad things happen in general, a lot of people don't want to talk to their investors about them because they're either embarrassed or they're afraid that they won't be supportive. But in most cases, if you built trust and built relationship with an investor, I think that there really isn't much, like, it's hard to not justify doing something like that. And it's also a way to build relationships with investors too. So, another experience that we had last year, we wanted to try and help get Arweave in the hands of more universities, primarily working with students as a goal of bringing more university age students into the ecosystem to get started building on Arweave. And that was a really interesting experience because we held hackathons, events, traveled to several schools in person, and got to know a bunch of different people working in a bunch of different places with a bunch of different focuses. Um, but at the end of the day, I think that what we learned was that it doesn't make sense to approach universities without a strong call to action and time to invest. I think looking back on it, our problem or the mistake that we made was we wanted to talk about the technology and we wanted people to see the technology and think of things that they could do with it and then act on those things. Um, but as with most marketing funnels, it's never that simple. Typically, I think everyone here in AO Ventures might be the minority because you all are so staked in and already interested in building on AO and have your own ideas. But the majority of people don't, and so trying to bootstrap an ecosystem or bootstrap a product, you need a stronger call to action and obviously time to invest. I think that we could have spent a lot more time working with students one on one to help them get, I suppose you could say like comfortable with the technology, but we didn't have that time to invest, and so we kind of missed out on that opportunity. I think because we couldn't take the time to invest it. The other story, I suppose, that some of you may remember last year, some of you may not. Again, peak bear market, people started becoming unhappy with the ecosystem. I think when numbers go down, the unfortunate thing about capitalism and markets in general is that when you have these tokens that are public that people can speculate on, oftentimes that speculation can really cast a shadow on what actually matters, which is what people are building and where the focus is inside of the community. But nonetheless, I think that it was a really hard time for everyone that was around, and community members started becoming unhappy. And that was sort of like this negative energy that was difficult to redirect to the right places. Um, the reason for this is because at the time there were several founders that were, having trouble fundraising, as mentioned. There's also a negative sentiment when focused on building. And ironically, the reason for this is because what people oftentimes want to see is they want to see growth and they want to see people coming into the community and joining and being excited about the technology. And so that means that people are getting pushed to focus more on marketing than actually building things when sentiment is negative. It's kind of counterintuitive though, because building the right thing is what kind of can help plant the seed for people to get excited and come in. And so, nonetheless, it was sort of this chicken and egg problem that resulted in negative sentiment because AO hadn't yet been released and was still very much in the process of being, developed. We were building a lot of things ourselves internally that we hadn't launched yet and weren't communicating properly about. And that kind of goes back to those 5 buckets of stakeholders that you have to communicate to effectively. And so anyway, rumors started about needing to fork Arweave. Um, there were a number of reasons for this, none of which I think really defensible over the long term. But nonetheless, people started trying to think through how they could extract value in other places aside from fundraising or growing communities and things like this. And so, the conversation of starting to fork Arweave kind of came into fruition, which was really unfortunate. And a community member ended up committing to the effort, and started assembling investors, trying to kind of back channel behind the scenes and put some plans together to make this happen. Which was really hard. It was hard to go through that because for the past 5 years I've been building on this technology that I think the world of, and it was really disappointing to see someone so unhappy with it that they felt they needed to fork it and take it in its own direction. Um, I learned a few things from that experience. The first is that decentralized ecosystems need to have decentralized power. I think what can happen is people can wind up in large positions of power that they can then use against an ecosystem. So I'll give you the example of like Coinbase, because Coinbase might be a good one here that's outside of Arweave. Um, the truth of the matter is that the product that brings in the consumers has a lot of power because the person or the people in charge of that product with those consumers can then say, well, why don't we just verticalize and build our own infrastructure under the consumer base that we have? uh, they launched Base. That financially, economically, that was a sensible decision for them to make. But for a technology like Arweave, the whole goal is to be creating these decentralized, permissionless applications that can live on forever. We don't need to have these like capitalistic engines that are, existing within the community to extract value from people that are building on this stuff. And it can also really hurt, like in a time of weakness where there's negative sentiment, even if it's not for a good reason. Um, speculation can really harm something and its sustainability. And so I think it would have been potentially negative to fork the ecosystem and kind of split into two sides if that had have gone through at the time. The second thing is teams need feedback and opportunities to carve out unique niches. So with all of that said, of like don't avoiding monopolizing certain parts of the ecosystem, it is important that there exist opportunities for teams to pursue, that they can innovate on. I think that that's really critical. The message here is not to just not create things of value. It's more so try and carve out a unique niche, but try not to make it so value extractive and put yourself in a position of power to be able to fork the ecosystem. um, that's not quite not quite good for everything that it stands for. Unless you consider a fair fork, which I think does make sense if you have a better idea for how the technology underneath could actually operate instead of just aiming to get more economic upside from it. So I think that in order to pad for these things, teams need to have opportunities to carve out niches. I think it's critical. I think in summary, so that those were some of the biggest learnings from last year. In summary, I would say they come down to really three core learnings that I kind of came to terms with at the end of last year in preparation for this year. The first is that you need to know yourself to help a company learn itself. Um, the reason for this is because as a founder, I think it's incredibly important to know your strengths, but even more important to know your weaknesses. And I learned a lot about my weaknesses at the time because I was tested with all of these bad things happening, and I didn't realize I was so dependent on other people's praise. And so I think that once I was able to learn that about myself, it really helped shape my perspective on how to structure the company, but also what direction to take the company. And so I think that in general, like knowing yourself can help you put the right people or the right building blocks in the right places to solve for any weaknesses that you have. Um, because I guess it takes a village to build a village. It's not just one person. Um, I think since we're building on Arweave in a decentralized ecosystem, it really, it can't be done by one person. We've really enjoyed building out a lot of this infrastructure as a team, but community labs really only works because it's just a team of teams for the most part. um, People feel ownership over the work that they're doing and care to continue pursuing it independently of any direction that we're able to provide. And it's better this way because, we're building things that are hopefully going to be able to outlive us. And so doing that, it takes a village. And also, trust in the early days for the things that don't start out decentralized on day one. Um, I think it takes trust to build a community and get to a place where things can decentralize. Or in the early stages of a company where you're not seeing results, trusting that, the right things will happen at the right times and that you'll find a way. I think that's really important too. And probably the biggest lesson that the hard times are by far, for me at least, the most defining moments. um, Try and see hard times as opportunities rather than things that are hard and are tearing you down. Um, I'm really thankful for what we went through last year in the bear market. That was really, I would say, probably my first market cycle as a founder, at least, which is very different than going through a bear market as as an outsider. And so I think that taking advantage of the hard times is really what can make or break a lot of situations. And for us, I would say like we were very fortunate that it helped us a ton to go through those things. And the relationships that we have coming out of them are far stronger than they were going into them. Now, with that said, on a bit of a lighter note, I wanted to mention one learning about 2024, primarily because I found it slightly comedic. Um, I think one thing that we've been doing a lot in the company is thinking about goals, and quantifiable goals. So with that, we've been crunching a lot of numbers on RConnect and the analytics that we have. Um, One of the questions that I realized recently, that I need to ask more people is, well, are you actually using RConnect's website in the way that we are hoping for you to? I have another slide right after this that'll explain that. But to jump to a conclusion really quick, because I think I missed the order here. Over 75% of the users that visit rconnect.io end up downloading the extension. Our team was trying to think through opportunities to improve the funnel for rconnect and converting people. But when we realized that over 75% of the people that actually visit the site end up downloading the extension, we were pretty excited by that. It means, we think at least, our hunch is that people are already convinced that rconnect is the thing that they want to use. And so that is a testament to like building a tool that other devs in the ecosystem can leverage. Can This is like that strategy kind of playing out in real time that can feed you a user base that is perfectly targeted to the niche that you're serving, and the needs that you're able to meet. So a question, I got ahead of myself there a second ago, but how many of you have actually read through rconnect's website? um, I'll try and check the chat after this because unfortunately I don't have multiple monitors and can't see. But it's really wild because what we found is that over 80% of the people that sign on to rconnect.io at any point in time do not scroll once. So literally all people do is they go to rconnect.io and click the download button and then download the extension. We spent a lot of time trying to design rconnect's site to be very pretty, and fun for you to interact with. And we've learned that it is completely useless that we spent time doing that. So that goes to say, I guess, important to pay attention to what the users do and what the users care about, because we might have wasted some time there, but all for good reason, I suppose. Um, so yeah, thank you. In case you haven't seen ArcNext's actual website, here it is. You don't need to scroll; it's all there. So happy to answer any questions for you. Yeah, I think we might have a few extra minutes here. Can just answer questions if they've come up, but if not, thank you guys for the time and excited to see what you all have been building.
Perfect. Thank you, Tate. Yeah, we got a couple. To be honest, I just went on the ArtConnect website. I downloaded the extension and I left. But it looks like some of the people in the comments read the docs, which is good. Here, so I'll just read out the questions to you, and then we'll go one by one.
Perfect.
So first question for you, Tate. Is it okay to tell potential investors that you plan to use some of the capital to pay yourself?
Yes, totally. I think that obviously within reason, right? For the first over a year of building after having fundraised, I personally didn't pay myself, but I was fortunate to be in a position where I lived in my basement and I didn't need to pay myself. I know that that's not reality. I think reality for most people is at the end of the day, you have to put food on the table. And so what I would say is, um, within reason, it is completely justifiable to pay yourself. I think, yeah, like one way to see it is what you want to do with the capital that you've raised is give yourself as many chances or opportunities as possible to increase the value of the thing that you're building significantly. And if there's anything that could distract from that, like having to worry about putting food on the table every night or paying rent, that's just a distraction. That actually takes away from your ability to return your investors value because your focus is away from actually building the company. And so I would say that, yeah, within reason, it definitely makes sense to tell people that you have to pay yourself, for sure.
Was it Peter Thiel said famously, CEOs should not pay themselves over 150K a year, even after a Series A or something. Have you heard of this, Tate?
I have, and believe it or not, that number was actually lower, and I think has more recently been adjusted for inflation. But yes, I have, and I agree with that for sure.
Okay. He said 100K or something initially.
Okay. Yeah, I think
Um,
it's all relative, but a big part of it will come down to how much you raise and how much your cost of living is wherever you are. Yeah,
right. Okay. Regarding the decentralized power topic, what is your perspective on how to position a project or technology being built on AO to have a competitive advantage sufficient to raise funding?
interesting. I would say, in general, um, right now AO is this huge green field of opportunity. Um, if you compare the size of AO's ecosystem to the size of anything else like Solana or Ethereum or even something much smaller like Avalanche, um, there is still so much stuff to be done. And so if you're able to build something that solves a problem for people and is able to monetize effectively, and ideally, doesn't compete with anyone right now. And that's more of an opinion than anything. I just don't think it makes sense to compete with people because the market is, it's small, and so it makes sense to capture the small market and then grow with it. I think that would put you in the best position to be able to raise funding. Um, if you I guess if you're trying to think about pitching something that you're building on AO, and let's think about it from the context of like if I was building a lending protocol or a DEX on AO, and I was going to try and fundraise for it, and I was comparing it to other DEXs or other lending protocols outside of crypto. Um, I think that being able to have a comparison like that, number one, is helpful because you want to be able to point out uh, the unique features that this product or this protocol can serve. Maybe because of AO's technology that these other products and other ecosystems can't really meet the needs of. I think that that's important to point out those like unique use cases and benefits that are specific to AO, like leveraging the technology, leaning into the uniqueness rather than going away from it. And then the other thing that can help for fundraising specifically is raising capital from investors that are already excited about Arweave and the ecosystem. That's something that we've spent a lot of time putting together a great group for. We spend a lot of time talking with investors that are very excited about Arweave, and so if you have someone that already understands the benefits and the value prop of AO, and you convince them that the thing that you're building within the ecosystem makes sense. I think that that's far easier than trying to convince someone who doesn't have that context of Arweave or AO that what you're working on makes sense. So I think that that's probably the other way to think about it is consider investors already deploying capital towards Arweave as friendlies in this case.
And next question, can you provide some insight into what your path to fundraising was, i.e., seeking out specific investors, realigning objectives, etc.?
For sure. Yeah, I think that my process for this has admittedly changed over the years as we've done this a few times, and I've been able to improve, I would say. With that said, though, there's no right way to do this. But my path to doing it was um, finding in the first fundraise that we did, identifying a few key partners, and more likely than not, angels as opposed to funds, um, and bringing them on board at a very reasonable price, something that makes them feel like they're getting a good deal because they'll be excited about the opportunity for upside and be, equally incentivized to help add value to what you're doing. The other reason that angels probably make sense first is because angels can help introduce you to funds later on down the line. That as you continue to raise more, you can have warm introductions straight into the funds that would be writing checks at the sizes that you'd be looking for. The other reason is because angels, when you start raising more in the future, might be priced out of a round. Angels typically like to get in very early. And so being able to involve individuals early that you can have a direct relationship with without as much, corporate bureaucracy, I think is very helpful for things. For me, that was the path that I took in the beginning was raising from one angel who then introduced me to multiple other angels who then introduced me to funds. And if you think of it as like a tree, it kind of branched out that way. But at the end of the day, it started with angels that were getting a good deal, and brought in some funds from there, and that was kind of the beginning of that. I would say also, in terms of seeking out specific investors, I didn't know what questions to ask at the time, admittedly, when I was doing this for the first time. But what I know now is that you typically want to ask questions like, what areas do you typically find yourself helping portfolio companies in the most? Where are you most interested in spending your time? Um, what are the other places that you all are deploying capital in, and why? How much capital are you deploying in these different in companies? Uh, what is the size of the fund that you're deploying from? The reason for that question is because if someone's giving you a check for $1,000 but has $100 million fund, they're probably not going to spend any time with you because, simply put, $1,000 is not much in the grand scheme of $100 million fund. And so you want people that are, appropriately sized for the stage that you're raising at. And so I would say, like, asking those types of questions is really important. And then also thinking about critically areas that you want help from your investors in. So in some cases, maybe that's like partnerships with different geographies. In some cases, maybe it's help or advice with like hiring or business development. Or in some cases, maybe you're building a product and you're trying to appeal to a target customer that investor invests in a lot of people that fit that target customer demographic. I would say, like, those are all things that you could be potentially looking for, but important to approach conversations with, and knowing what you want to get out of it. It's kind of like dating in that way. You can use the first few to learn, but eventually you figure out what you know you want, and then can kind of move from there.
And how do you price ideas?
How do you price ideas? Um, I think that ideas are much more of a commodity these days than what's much harder is executing on those ideas. I think the truth of the matter is that we have a lot of systems that are making it very easy to generate ideas and come up with opportunities. But the difference between coming up with an opportunity and pursuing it is that you oftentimes have something to show for that. I think if you're thinking about it from the concept of fundraising and you're wanting to fundraise off of an idea, um, I think investors will most likely take a similar stance to what I just said. Um, I think right now we're in a market where a lot of people are going to fundraise off of ideas, and they can do that. But the risk in doing so is that the stakes of fundraising on an idea and then being accountable to execute on it are very high, much higher than if you're coming to market and fundraising already having something built out that you can show people. Um, let's see. I think let's see. Someone said start with 10 million as a baseline for every idea. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the original idea for Birdo, which was the first DEX built on Arweave, was valued at 100K. It was 100K cap, a market cap, if we had have built that out and raised from Ford Research on that idea. And so I think that there's a big range to what these things can be, but it really does come down to execution. And my recommendation would not be to raise on ideas. I think that I always tell people it's better to build to raise than it is to raise to build. Also, because you'll get more favorable terms that way if you have something to show.
To add on to that as well, how do you, to be more exact, how do you price ideas with a reputation of competency? Um, that
Mm.
reputation saying, yes, this is my idea, and on my word, I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. I think yeah, it's hard because there are two different schools of thought. One school of thought is raise as much money as you possibly can when you can do it, and worry about the rest later. The other school of thought is take a risk of building something and then go to market for more favorable terms. I would say if you're in a position where you need capital now and don't have any other options to get by, and you think that there is opportunity to raise, then maybe consider going to market. But one tip that I like to give people when they go to fundraise for the first time, or I've done this every time, is don't go with a valuation set. This is super underrated, but what I always do is I go and talk to people about what I know I need from a capital perspective and why I need the amount of capital that I do. And I don't worry about the price or the valuation or the market cap or anything like that, um, because it's a really silly reason for someone to turn you down if they think that what you're doing is overpriced. And if you're in your position of like, I don't even know how to price this idea, even though I am competent and I have a track record and I can prove to you that I can do it. So generally what's best to do is figure out what your needs are first and then talk to people and see if people are interested in what you have. And then from there, work with the people that you know are interested in the thing to figure out what price makes the most sense. We've by far had the most success with that, and it avoids giving someone a sour taste in their mouth for a dumb reason, like it's just too expensive for me right now, especially if you're not certain and don't know yet how much it actually is worth.
Um, we'll do two more questions. I see two more left. Um, so, Tate, is there a particular monetization strategy you feel makes the most sense for new projects on Arweave/AO? Tokenization versus SaaS versus question mark? And how important is it for that strategy to be fleshed out as a project begins fundraising?
Interesting. I think that the ideas of tokenization are inherently more attractive um, to the investors that are deploying in this industry. I think SaaS, you can't go wrong with it though. SaaS is a great way to focus on generating revenue, which I think in many cases is more defensible than what a lot of people have been doing these days with the types of tokens that they've launched. Putting that lightly, I think What's probably more important is to have a strategy on how to find users for the things that you're building, and then being able to figure out how to monetize that thing if you're not sure, or at least figure out how to ask people that question and get feedback on how to monetize it. Um, I think if you're focused on building something truly decentralized, tokenization makes so much more sense because you can put it out there, align incentives for the long term, and then not worry about it. It's there, and the model will be tested basically. But if you're not building something in a decentralized environment, if you're not building a decentralized protocol, SaaS couldn't might not be a bad option. I think in many cases it comes down to what is the most attractive for you in the position that you have, given the product that you have, and what will sustain you. And in some cases, that means what is the most investable. Um, I think yeah, many would say tokenization. But I can't give you a straight answer to that one. I think it depends on the product itself.
And last question, cheap, fast, or quality, you can only pick two.
Interesting. Uh, I have always biased towards. I've always biased towards fast and quality, and I've found a way to make it cheap. And that might be cheating, but I think that at the end of the day, you have to do the most with what you have. And so, if you are finding that you don't have enough, or rather you're not able to do enough with what you have, in many cases that means finding something else that works better. And so I think optimizing for cheap is more of a secondary thing. Optimizing for fast and quality are able to differentiate you. Cheap is something that I would consider more so table stakes, and I suppose de-risking anything that you're working on. But fast and quality would be my two favorite.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Tate. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the questions, and thank you everyone else for being here. We'll be doing two more keynotes next week, keynote number 10 and 11. Those will be non-technical, so we're excited for those ones. Um, and we've received a lot of your guys' demo day recording submissions. We're working through those now, and we'll be reaching out to you guys shortly. But again, we're very excited to see the projects that you guys are building, and we're happy to support you guys in building out the permanent web. And we'll see you guys later.
Thanks, everyone.